Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My name is Caspian, and I'm a realtor. Or, I was. My business card didn't just say realtor, though. It should have said architect of new beginnings or curator of domestic dreams. That's how I saw myself. I didn't just sell houses or facilitate rentals, I matched people to properties. I had a gift, a kind of professional sixth sense. I could sit with a client for 20 minutes, listen to the words they said, and more importantly, the words they didn't, and I could see it. I could see the house they belonged in. I could see the front door they needed to walk through to become the next version of themselves. I prided myself on this intuition. It was more than just a sales tactic, it was my identity. My success was built on my ability to read people, to understand their deepest desires for security, for status, for sanctuary. I saw the soul of a person and found the walls to put around it. And I was good, very good. My reputation was impeccable, my client list was exclusive, and my life was a comfortable, well-appointed structure of my own making. Then she walked into my office. Her name was Lyra. She didn't have an appointment. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large window behind her, turning her into a silhouette, obscuring her features. She was looking for a rental, she said, her voice a soft, hesitant murmur. She needed something specific, private, secluded, with no close neighbors and the best, fastest internet connection available. It was an unusual combination of requests. Usually, people who wanted seclusion didn't care about fiber optic speeds. As she stepped forward into the light, I saw why she was so hesitant. She looked like a bird with a broken wing. There was a fragility about her, a tremor in her hand she tried to still by clutching her purse. She was beautiful, but it was a haunted, fragile beauty. She told me a story, a carefully constructed narrative of escape. She spoke vaguely of a controlling ex, a toxic family situation, a life she needed to disappear from. She needed a sanctuary, a place where she could work online, build a new, quiet life, and feel safe. Every word she spoke was a perfectly chosen note in a symphony of vulnerability. And I, Caspian, the master reader of people, listened and was utterly, completely captivated. My professional intuition, the skill that had made me successful, was instantly hijacked by a more primal, more dangerous instinct, the desire to be a savior. I didn't see a client anymore. I saw a damsel in distress. I saw a rescue mission. I saw a project. The usual red flags, the ones my professional training should have made me see in flashing neon, were just invisible to me. She had no rental history, no verifiable references. Her story about her previous life was full of holes and contradictions. She wanted to handle the deposit and first month's rent with a series of money orders, not a traceable check. I should have politely shown her the door. Instead, I saw these things not as warnings, but as further proof of her desperation. Of course she had no references. She was running for her life. Of course she was using untraceable funds. She was hiding from a monster. My mind, my supposed gift, was no longer an analytical tool. It was a machine for manufacturing justifications, for building a fantasy around this mysterious, broken woman. I told her I would help her. I told her not to worry. I, Caspian, would find her a fortress. I would be her champion. My obsession began in that first meeting. It was a swift and total conquest. I believed I was reading her soul, understanding her deepest need for safety. The tragic irony is that she was reading me far better. She looked at me and saw exactly what I was. A man so in love with his own perception, so blinded by his own hero complex, that he would willingly hand her the keys to his own destruction. And she was right. My hunt for Lyra's sanctuary became an obsession that consumed my every waking moment. I neglected my other clients, the high-value buyers and sellers who were the lifeblood of my business. Their needs seemed so mundane, so trivial compared to Lyra's epic struggle for survival. I wasn't just looking for a rental, I was on a quest. I used every tool at my disposal, every professional connection I had cultivated over the years. I called in favors. I leaned on fellow realtors. I spent hours scouring listings for that perfect, impossible combination: total seclusion and high-tech connectivity. Finally, I found it. It was a property that had been a thorn in my side for a year. A modern, minimalist house tucked away in the hills, owned by a tech investor who lived in another country and just wanted the mortgage covered. It was difficult to rent because of its isolation. For Lyra, it was perfect. It was a fortress of solitude. I presented it to her like a knight presenting a captured castle to his queen. She toured the property, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes wide with what I took to be awe and relief. When she stood on the back deck, looking out over the canyon with no other houses in sight, she turned to me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I can be safe here." That was it. That was the moment my last remaining shred of professional objectivity died. I fast-tracked the application. The overseas landlord was, as I knew, notoriously hands-off. He just wanted a tenant who would pay on time and not cause problems. I leveraged my reputation to vouch for Lyra. I wrote a glowing recommendation, a work of pure fiction. I painted her as a quiet, responsible freelance writer seeking solitude to finish a novel. When the issue of her lack of references and her desire to pay the large deposit in cash came up, I smoothed it over. I told the landlord I would personally guarantee the lease. It was an insane, career-suicidal move. I, a professional realtor, was co-signing, in spirit if not on paper, for a tenant I knew nothing about. But in my mind, it wasn't a business transaction. It was a chivalrous act. The day she moved in, I was there. I helped her carry the few boxes she had. The house was mostly empty, and she claimed her possessions were in storage, another part of her escape from her dark past. The relationship quickly bled from professional into personal. A few weeks after she moved in, the problems began. It started small, a frantic, tearful call. Her car had broken down, and she needed it for essential trips. Could I possibly help? I paid for the repairs without a second thought. Then it was a utility bill she had forgotten about in the chaos of her move. I covered it. Each time, she was filled with a heart-wrenching mix of shame and gratitude. She promised to pay me back as soon as her new online business was off the ground. That business was her next hook. She told me about it in vague, exciting terms. It was some kind of e-commerce venture, an exclusive dropshipping business that required an initial investment for website development and inventory. She showed me a slick but superficial business plan. It was full of buzzwords like passive income and market disruption, but thin on actual details. Any other time, I would have seen it for the nonsense it was. But I wasn't any other time. I was under her spell. I saw this not as a risk, but as an opportunity to be her hero once again. I could be the one to empower her, to help her build her new, independent life. I became her angel investor. I gave her the money, a significant sum from my own savings. I was no longer just her realtor, her guarantor, her handyman. I was her patron, her financier. And I was a fool. The red flags were no longer subtle. They were giant crimson banners flapping in a hurricane, and I was willfully blind to them. Her online life was a fortress I couldn't penetrate. She'd angle her laptop away whenever I came near. The delivery started. Not just a few packages, but a constant stream of them. Boxes of all shapes and sizes, from all over the world. When I asked, she said it was inventory for her business. She became a ghost in her own life. She had no friends who came to visit. She never wanted to go out. Her entire existence was contained within the walls of the house I had found for her. Whenever my questions got too specific, she would deploy her ultimate weapon, her trauma. My inquiries would trigger a tearful relapse into the frightened, fragile woman I had first met. She would accuse me of not trusting her, of acting just like her controlling ex. And I, desperate to remain her savior, would retreat,
apologizing, drowned in a fresh wave of guilt. I was so focused on saving the tenant in the house that I never realized the real tenant, the one who had taken up residence in my soul, was a complete and utter fraud. For months, I lived in this state of willful ignorance, a high-wire act of self-deception. I was pouring money, time, and my professional reputation into a black hole, all for the intoxicating feeling of being Lyra's protector. The breaking point, the moment the wire finally snapped, didn't come from a single dramatic event. It was a slow, creeping dread, an accumulation of details so strange they finally overwhelmed my capacity for delusion. It started with a phone call from the property owner in Singapore. He was a numbers guy, not an emotional one. He had received a notification from his internet service provider about the account at the rental property. The data usage was astronomical, beyond anything a residential account should be using. He wasn't angry, just curious. He asked me what kind of novel my quiet, freelance writer tenant was working on. I fumbled for an answer, something about video research and large file transfers, but the seed of professional doubt had been planted.
I was the guarantor of this tenancy. My name was on the line. That night, I did something I hadn't done since the beginning. I acted like a realtor. I did my due diligence, 6 months too late. I started with her name, Lyra. The background check I ran came back with nothing. No credit history, no previous addresses, no digital footprint beyond the last few months. It was as if she hadn't existed before she walked into my office. The name was an alias. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't the behavior of a woman escaping an abusive ex. This was the behavior of a professional. The business she was supposedly running, the one I had funded, I had never seen a website, a product, anything tangible. I started digging into the deliveries. I had helped her carry some of the boxes. I remembered the names of some of the shipping companies. A few discreet inquiries, leveraging my professional contacts, revealed that the packages were not inventory being delivered to her, but merchandise being shipped out to hundreds of different addresses all over the country. And the return address on these packages wasn't the secluded rental. It was a P.O. box registered to a shell corporation that I traced back to an IP address, which I then traced back to the house. I felt my carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. The final piece of the puzzle came from a source I never expected. An old friend of mine works in the fraud department for a major credit card company. Over a beer, I described a hypothetical situation I was dealing with for a client. I talked about the alias, the secluded house, the massive internet usage, the high volume of outbound shipments. My friend didn't even let me finish. He stopped me, his face grim. He said it was a classic setup for a triangulation fraud scheme. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening final thud. Lyra was running a sophisticated scam. Step 1, create a fake online storefront, probably on a platform like Shopify, selling popular electronics at a deep discount. Step 2, when a customer buys an item, she takes their money. Step 3, she then uses stolen credit card numbers, likely purchased on the dark web, to buy the same item from a legitimate retailer and have it shipped directly to the customer. The customer gets their product and is happy. The legitimate retailer gets paid. The only victim is the person whose credit card number was stolen. And by the time they notice the fraudulent charge, Lyra has already taken the clean money from her fake storefront and vanished. The house I had found her, the sanctuary, was the perfect command center. The seclusion protected her from prying eyes. The high-speed internet was essential for managing the high volume of fraudulent transactions. And I was the most important piece of the entire operation. I was her cover. My reputation as a top realtor was the perfect shield. I had vouched for her. I had put my name on the line. I had given her a legitimate, respectable frontman who could secure the perfect base of operations. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it left me breathless. Every memory I had of her, every moment of vulnerability, every tear, every whispered thank you, was a lie.
Her fragility wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon, and she had wielded it with surgical precision. Her love wasn't a feeling, it was a tactic. My obsession, my need to be a hero, had been her primary tool of manipulation. I wasn't her savior, I was her mark, the easiest one she'd ever had. She hadn't just rented a house from me, she had rented my entire identity. She had rented my professional standing, my credibility, my soul, and the lease was about to come due. The drive up to the house in the hills was the longest drive of my life. The winding road, which once seemed like a path to a secret garden, now felt like a descent into a personal hell. I didn't have a plan. I was operating on pure, unadulterated rage and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. I found her on the back deck, the same place where she had cried and told me she could finally be safe. She was on her laptop, surrounded by the tools of her trade. She looked up when I walked out, and for a fleeting second, she put on the mask of the fragile, startled Lyra. Then she saw my face. She saw the papers in my hand, the printouts of the Shell Corporation, the shipping manifests, the fraud report my friend had helped me compile. And the mask didn't just slip. She took it off, folded it, and put it away. The transformation was the most chilling thing I have ever witnessed. The vulnerable, broken bird was gone. In her place was a woman of ice and steel. Her posture straightened. Her eyes, which had always been wide and fearful, became sharp and appraising. She looked at me not as a lover or a savior, but as a business problem that needed to be solved. "So," she said, her voice devoid of the soft lilt I had come to love. "The landlord found out." No denial, no apology, no explanation, just a cold, tactical assessment. I laid out the evidence, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely control. I told her I knew everything, the alias, the stolen credit cards, the fraud. I don't know what I expected. Tears, a confession, maybe even a flicker of the woman I thought I knew. Instead, she laughed. A short, sharp, cruel bark of a laugh. "Oh, Caspian," she said, and the way she used my name felt like she was twisting a knife. "Don't be so dramatic. It was just business, and you were the best business investment I ever made." She laid it all out with a brutal, dispassionate clarity. She told me she had targeted me from the beginning. She had researched me, learned my reputation, my ego, my savior complex. She had crafted her entire persona, the fragile damsel, specifically for me. She mocked me for my gullibility, for how easy it was to play on my noble instincts. "You didn't fall in love with me," she said, her words cutting me to the bone. "You fell in love with a mirror. I showed you the hero you wanted to be, and you were so busy admiring the reflection you never once thought to look behind it." The collapse came swiftly after that. While I was still reeling from her confession, she was already gone. She packed a single bag, wiped her laptops, and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing in the middle of the crime scene I had so diligently helped to create. Within a week, the walls came crashing down. The credit card companies, alerted by the spike in fraud, traced the operation back to the house. The out-of-state landlord, facing legal action himself, immediately filed a lawsuit against me for gross negligence, fraud, and breach of contract. My brokerage, a firm I had helped build, fired me in a terse, two-sentence email to contain the public relations nightmare. The State Real Estate Commission launched a formal investigation that resulted in the suspension of my license. Every asset I had was frozen. The money I had invested in her was gone, vaporized into the same digital ether as her fake identity. The savings I had spent a lifetime accumulating were wiped out by the first wave of legal fees. My name, once a symbol of trust and success in the local real estate community, was now synonymous with scandal and failure. My core identity, the belief in my own intuition, was shattered. The man who could read souls had been played for a fool by a woman who had none. I stood in the wreckage of my life, haunted by her final words. She was right. I hadn't been betrayed by a monster. I had been betrayed by my own reflection. I had rented my soul to a phantom, and she had left me with nothing but the eviction notice. Rock bottom is a surprisingly quiet place. There's no dramatic explosion, just the silent, suffocating pressure of absolute failure. My descent was swift. The lawsuit from the landlord forced me into bankruptcy. I had to sell my beautifully curated condo, the physical manifestation of my success, to cover a fraction of the legal debts. Every piece of furniture, every book, every object I had acquired was sold off, a public auction of my former life. I walked away with a suitcase and a car that was next on the chopping block. My new home was a single, grim room in a weekly rental motel on the industrial edge of the city. The irony was a constant bitter taste in my mouth. I, Caspian, the curator of domestic dreams for the wealthy, was now living in a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. My professional world, the only one I had ever known, was closed to me. Old colleagues would cross the street to avoid me. My calls went unreturned. I was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at industry mixers. The shame was a physical cloak I couldn't take off. For weeks, I did nothing. I was paralyzed by a fog of regret and a self-loathing so profound it felt like a terminal illness. I replayed every conversation with Lyra, every lie she told, every red flag I had so eagerly painted green. I dissected my own motives with the cold, unforgiving precision of a coroner. And I had to face the ugly, undeniable truth. My obsession with her wasn't pure, selfless love. It was selfish. It was driven by my own ego, by a deep-seated need to be the hero in someone else's story. I hadn't been saving her. I had been using her vulnerability to validate my own sense of power and importance. She was a fraud, but I had been committing my own kind of fraud, pretending my ego was love. Survival became a stark, simple equation. I sold my car. I took a job that was a special kind of hell. I became a property inspector for a bottom-feeding property management company that specialized in low-income rentals. My days were spent walking through the broken homes of desperate people. I documented cracked foundations, black mold, faulty wiring, all the ugly realities hidden behind the facade of a rental agreement. It was a humiliating daily penance. I, who had once dealt in multi-million-dollar vistas and gourmet kitchens, was now taking pictures of cockroach infestations for minimum wage. But in that miserable, humbling work, something began to shift. I was no longer dealing with clients. I was dealing with people. I saw their struggles, their resilience, their dignity in the face of impossible circumstances. I wasn't their hero. I was just the guy checking the smoke detectors. One afternoon, I was inspecting a crumbling apartment building. An elderly woman, a tenant there for 30 years, pulled me aside. She showed me a letter from her landlord, a confusing, legally worded notice of a massive rent increase she couldn't possibly afford. It was a clear-cut case of illegal eviction tactics, something the old Caspian would have known how to fight in his sleep. She was terrified, convinced she was about to be homeless. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a person's need without seeing it as a reflection of my own. There was no ego in it, no thrill of the rescue. There was just a person who needed help. I sat with her at her small kitchen table, read the document, and used the last vestiges of my old knowledge to tell her exactly what her rights were, who she needed to call at the Legal Aid Society, what she needed to say. It was a small thing. It took me 15 minutes, but as I walked away from her building, I felt a flicker of something I thought was dead. It wasn't pride, it was purpose. It was a quiet, unfamiliar feeling, the feeling of being useful for nothing in return. It was the first solid piece of ground I had felt under my feet since the day I met Lyra. That small act of assistance became a new, tentative blueprint. I started volunteering at the same Legal Aid Society I had sent the elderly woman to. At first, they were hesitant, aware of my reputation. But I wasn't asking to be a realtor or a lawyer. I was just asking to help. I offered them my specialized, intimate knowledge of the real estate world's underbelly. I knew the loopholes landlords used. I knew how to read a lease to find the hidden traps. I could translate the dense legalese that was designed to intimidate and confuse. My fall from grace had given me a unique education in the architecture of exploitation. The work was the opposite of my old life. There were no commissions, no accolades, no beautifully staged photographs. My office was a cramped cubicle in a noisy, underfunded basement. My clients weren't wealthy investors. They were single mothers, recent immigrants, elderly people on fixed incomes, all of them terrified of losing the one thing they had. My job wasn't to find them their dream home. It was to help them stay in the only home they had. It was the hardest and most meaningful work I had ever done. Each small victory, a delayed eviction, a repaired heater, a returned security deposit, was a quiet act of atonement. I was using the knowledge I had gained in the service of my own ego to dismantle the abuses of others. I was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding my own integrity from the ground up. I learned to read people again, but my methods were different. I no longer looked for what I wanted to see, for the reflection of my own heroic fantasies. I learned to listen, to see the exhaustion and fear behind their eyes, to understand that their problems were not opportunities for me to feel good about myself, but real, painful struggles for survival. My new intuition wasn't a flashy gift. It was a quiet, cautious skill, forged in the fires of my own humiliation and grounded in a hard-won empathy. I never recovered the money. My old life is gone forever, a ghost that sometimes haunts my memory. The scars of what Lyra did and what I allowed her to do will always be a part of me. The regret is a tenet that will likely live in my soul for the rest of my life. But it no longer owns the property. It's just there, a quiet reminder of the price of willful blindness. The ultimate fraud was not the one she committed. It was the one I committed against myself for years, believing that my success, my intuition, and my identity were built on a solid foundation. I was living in a house of cards long before she came along and blew it down. My life now is a small, simple structure. It's not a mansion on a hill. It's more like a one-room shelter, but it's mine. The foundation is solid. It's built not on the shifting sands of ego, but on the bedrock of service and humility. I no longer sell houses, but I understand what makes a home better than ever before. It has nothing to do with square footage or ocean views. It has everything to do with integrity. And for the first time, I feel like I'm finally building one for myself. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.